الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وأسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى to grant us tawfiq, to grant us success, and that He makes us the people of akhlaq in the dunya and He rewards us as such in the akhirah. This is the second lesson from the book that we are covering, Adab, Fusul Adab by Ibn Aqeel, Al-Allama Ibn Aqeel, Rahimahullah. This is a book which is of great benefit, and it has been given that emphasis by the ulama until contemporary times. And today is the first session where we are actually looking at the book and going to go through its benefits. And the ulama, like we said just a moment ago, the ulama have been using this book for a very long time, and they continue to do so until today. So anyone who wants to go through this book with further detail, especially those people who can understand Arabic, then we've got some of the ulama, one of them major scholar, who have explained the book in the Arabic language. So we've got Sa'ad ibn Turki al-Kathlan, Hafidhahullah. He's explained this book in about 14 lectures. This book was also explained in the Haram in Mecca by another one of the major scholars, Sheikh Abdul Muhsin al-Zamil. The Muhaqqiq himself, the one who compiled and edited the manuscripts, a teacher in Jami al-Islamiyya, the Islamic University in Medina, Sheikh Abdul Salam al-Suhaimi, he's got an explanation as well. And again, this shows the fact that the ulama have accepted this book and given it a great deal of importance. Not only because of the benefits in it, but also we learn as a methodology in seeking ilm that this is one of those primary mutun and treatises in the smaller books in this particular discipline, in this particular topic and field. And it is the way of the Salaf that they take those more simpler versions of the field or the topic that they are trying to study before they engage in more extensive works and more complicated areas within that field. So if a person wants to learn tafsir, they will start off with a simple tafsir and then move their way upwards. Same thing when it comes to aqeel, same thing when it comes to fiqh, same thing when it comes to character and akhlaq. So the more advanced books, you've got something like Adab al-Mufrad of Imam Bukhari, where he has compiled around 400 ahadith. Then you've got Adab al-Sharia of Ibn Muflih, student of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. And that's probably one of the most detailed books when it comes to adab and akhlaq. And some of the ulama have said that the adab al-sharia of Ibn Muflih, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it because of the details and the principles that have been mentioned. But before the student of knowledge gets to that kind of exposure to that learning, like we've said, it is the way of the Salaf, is that they take the mukhtasarat, the more smaller, summarized versions, also known as the mutun, the texts, the simpler texts, and they create for themselves a syllabus so that they become firm in the simpler issues in that topic, and then they work their way upwards. That's the way they can crystallize and reform their knowledge and then become skilled in that particular field. And this is the way, the manhaj of the Salaf of this ummah. But it's unfortunate, and I would presume, having good thoughts about us all, that the people who are listening to this lecture, they are the best of the Muslims. Because there are Muslims who, unfortunately, who are not, completing their iman or seeking to complete their iman, and they're happy with their level of iman. without seeking ilm, without doing extra acts of worship, without trying to improve themselves, etc. The best of the Muslims are those who actually listen and study. So that's why I say that the people who are probably listening to something like this, or generally just study and listen to other lectures and other duroos, they are probably the best of the Muslim Ummah. They are the best of the crop that we have, whether it's locally, whether it's nationally, whether it's internationally. But the problem is that even with that best of the best, it's become somewhat of a fitna that people want to learn, they want to benefit, they want to advance, but there's no real structure in the way that they do it. So they will go onto YouTube, they will use social media, whatever links are sent to them, whatever clips are sent to them, whatever articles and posters and screenshots and all these things. There's no real structure to learning. And the studying of books, the taking of the syllabus, going back to the ulama, has all been forgotten, and this is never the way of the Salaf. The way of the Salaf, like we've said before, is to take a topic, study its books, create a syllabus, and go back to the ulama. And this is still the manhaj until today, like we've said. One of the major scholars from the Permanent Committee of the Senior Scholars, former member, he excused himself, Sheikh Sa'id ibn Turki al-Kathlan, he's explained this book in 14 lectures. We'll do it in about 6, not as much detail, but it shows you that this is the way of the ulama: structure, syllabus, books, studying and learning. Not just taking ilm from here and there. And to prove this, this could be a lecture in itself, but just to highlight, Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, in his book, Khalq Af'al Ibad, he quotes another person, and his name is Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad, rahimahullah, and he said about taking those summarized books before the more advanced books, يقلل الكلام ليحفظ. First, take the words which may be brief so that they then may be memorized. Memorize, whether literal memorizing by word or memorize at least in its understanding. And this is why you will find that predominantly at the time of the Salaf, most of the ulama who wrote at that time, they didn't write extensive books. All of that came roughly around 200 years after Hijrah, etc. But before that, most of the information and the ilm was recorded and then taught in, with summarized brief words and speech so that people can understand it, memorize it, and then move on and then advance. يقلل الكلام ليحفظ. Therefore we see the importance of mukhtasarat, mutun. You can have, nazm, like we've got in this masjid, going through on the Friday, you have poetry, etc. So that words are brief, so that they may be memorized and understood easily. Like I said, that memorization could be memorization by a word, but the most important thing is that you understand the topic. And if the words are brief, you can walk away having benefited and say, I remember X, Y, and Z from the lecture. That's good. That's a good foundation. Then you move on to something more advanced in that topic. Then he went on to say, Khalil ibn Ahmad, rahimahullah, وَيُكْثَرْ لِيُفْهَمْ. Then it is expanded so that your understanding will then be expanded. Imam al-Zuhri, rahimahullah, once said to one of his students, Yunus ibn Yazid, "O Yunus, do not rush in seeking ilm." And what would he say today if he found people taking ilm from here and there without a syllabus, without the supervision of ulama, without books? This has never been the way of seeking ilm from the Salaf. Let alone, if we don't do this in our dunya, let alone doing it in our deen. If a a person wanted to learn about any particular field, academia, whatever it is, they wouldn't just listen to different YouTube clips. They'd go to the people of ilm in that field. They'll learn about the books in that field. And it's the same thing. He said, O Yunus, Imam al-Zuhri, he said, O Yunus, do not rush in seeking ilm, because ilm is like a valley in between two mountains. It's like a valley. Do not grab from the valley all at once, because at the bottom of the valley, that's where you get the fruits, because the water is trickling down. Do not grab all of the fruits at once. لكن خذوه مع الليالي والأيام. Rather, take the provisions that you need from the valley, from day to day and night to night. Pace yourself. Look, this is the point. فَمَنْ رَامَ الْعِلْمِ جُمْلَةً فَاتَهُ جُمْلَةً. Whoever takes ilm in one go, it will leave him in one go. And this shows you the importance of that syllabus. It shows you the importance of going back to books and the ulama and studying ilm under the supervision of those ulama. So the problem that we face today is people have left the books, they've left the syllabus, and they've left the ulama, and they're taking ilm from social media, and they're taking ilm from people who are lesser than the ulama, or they are not quoting the ulama. And this shows the importance as well for people like myself, the tulmab al-ilm, is to connect people back to the statements of the ulama. So alhamdulillah, we're going through a book here which has been explained previously by ulama, so we can benefit from their works, and I can then relate that to you, and then alhamdulillah, this is the way of the Salaf. But if you find students of knowledge not bringing people back to the ulama, you will find even some students of knowledge have been given lectures for a very long time, but not one book have they explained. Let alone taught people Aqeel, let alone taught people the things that they need to know the religion. It's just lecture after lecture, reminder after reminder. That's not the way of the Salaf. Books create a system for yourself, create a target for yourself, and do that under the supervision of the ulama, so that you will not become misguided or deviant or misunderstanding the context and the topics of those books. Because it could be easily said that people will then say, well, okay, I'll create for myself my own syllabus, but I won't go back to the ulama. I'll just read them for myself. So that's not sufficient. And likewise, it's not sufficient for a person to say, well, I know who the ulama are. I don't need a syllabus. I'll just listen to lectures here and there. That doesn't create students of knowledge either. Two things are absolutely essential. Sheikh Saleh al-Sheikh, one of the senior scholars also today, he said, وَطَلَبَ الْإِلْمِ لَهُ أُصُولُهُ وَلَهُ رُتْبَةٌ. Seeking knowledge has foundations and it has stages. فَمَنْ فَاتَهُ طَلَبَ الْإِلْمِ عَلَى رُتْبَةٍ وَأُصُولٍ فَإِنَّهُ يَحْرَمُ الْوُصُولِ. Whoever doesn't seek knowledge in those stages with those foundations, what does he mean by the foundations? The foundation that we just talked about. You need to stick to the ulama, and you need to stick to the books that they are teaching you according to the level in each topic. So for a beginner in Aqeedah, take a text in Aqeedah and then learn that with an alim. If you can't have access to that alim, or you don't know Arabic language, then a trustworthy student of knowledge who's going to then relay that information to you from trustworthy ulama. And if you can speak and understand the Arabic language, then create that syllabus. And you'll find many ulama, they've created a syllabus for themselves. Sheikh Abdul Muhsin al-Qasim, Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Qudair, Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan, and the list goes on. So Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh is saying here, if you don't have those usul, books with ulama, syllabus with ulama, you will not reach to the desired objective and goal, which is that you become firm in ilm. As Imam al-Zuhri rahimahullah said, فَمَنْ رَامَ الْعِلْمِ جُمْلَةً فاتته or فاته جملة. Whoever takes it in one go, whoever studies one mas'ala in detail, thinks, yes, I think I understand this very well. You've not done it in the right stages, you've not done it with the right supervision. Then it could be tomorrow you forget it, or it could be today that you don't implement it correctly because you don't have that syllabus and you don't have that supervision of the ulama. فاته جملة, and it will be left, even though he thinks that he has sought in. So this is very important before we go into this book, and it shows you the importance. May Allah have mercy on Ibn Aqeel for writing something like this, because it's a very important topic. So he begins the book by saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and this is manners in itself. Any affair that a person wants to begin, he should begin with Bismillah. This is upright character with his Lord, seeking his assistance. The reason why we say Bismillah is we seek the assistance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some of the ulama said the reason why we start with the Basmala is to seek his barakah, and there is no harm to say assistance and barakah. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, كُلُّ إِمْنِ ذِي بَالٍ لَا يُبْدَأْ فِيهِ بِالْحَمْدِ اللَّهِ. Any important affair that doesn't begin with the hamd of Allah, or in another narration with the Bismillah, فَهُوَ أَقْطَعْ, then it will be cut off. In another narration, فَهُوَ أَبْتَرْ, and it will be devoid of any khair and barakah and goodness and assistance. So part of manners with Allah and manners towards the creation and manners towards yourself is that you start with the name of Allah constantly, so that goodness can be brought about, so that your character can be completed, so that the thing that you're trying to achieve can be done in the best manner. So if a person wants to, for example, study an academic subject, say he's going to school tomorrow, or he's going to work tomorrow, etc., by starting with the Bismillah, not only is he showing that he needs Allah's assistance, but through that he wants to be as productive as he can, so that the people in the creation will benefit. And like we said, starting with the name of Allah is from the pinnacle of good manners towards Allah and the creation. The author says, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Muhammad, khatam al-nabiyyin, wa ala alihi wa ashabihi, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, wa sallama tasliman kathira ila yawm ad-din. This is, the manner of khutbah and addressing and even writing, that you start with praising Allah and sending peace and blessings and salutations on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the way of Ahlul Sunnah is to send it to his companions also, because there are deviant sects from the Khawarij and the Rawafid that do not believe in these things, in sending salutation to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's companions. وَسَلَّمَ تَسْلِيمًا كَثِيرًا إِلَى يَوْمِ الدِّينِ, and we ask that Allah extends it until the Day of Judgment. هذه نبذة من فصول الآداب ومكارم الأخلاق المشروعة. And he says now in this introduction that here are some examples from the chapters of adab, the chapters of behavior and noble manners which have been legislated in our religion. So this is important because he is clearly stating here that it's not exclusive to what he is going to mention. Now, from what I've counted, what he does, rahimahullah, which is very, again, accurate, proficient and beneficial, is that in each topic he has a chapter. So today's topic we're going to be talking about is about greeting and giving salam towards one another. So in this he has a chapter on how to give the salam, and a chapter of who to give the salam to, etc. And then next week there will be another chapter, and then with every topic there is a chapter. And in the book there are around, I think it's about 13, 14 chapters. So in this book he's going to talk about 13 or 14 points of benefit which will help you in your character. So that's why he's saying here, هَذِهِ نُبْذَةٌ min fusul al-adab. So these are just some examples, and he's going to point out what he believes are the 14 most important. So a person will think, okay, these 14, why has he picked these 14? Quite often, the ulama that write mutun, or the ulama that give us a mukhtasar, a summarized, abridged version as the entry point in a particular field, they will summarize in that book what we need to learn immediately, and from those topic areas will be the more extensive areas. So these are the foundations, these are the usul, if you like. These are the maxims and the principles. So in this book he's going to give us about 13, 14, and from them, from the very beginning, he says faslun, and he begins with the greeting. Because the greeting of Islam, Assalamu alaikum, is a symbol of Islam. It's the mentioning of the name of Allah upon the person that you meet. It is a dua. Through it comes about unity. Through it, peace is instilled in yourself, and then peace is then spread, and security is then spread to others around you. The Prophet ﷺ has told us that the best of the Muslims are those who spread the salam. The best of the Muslims are those people who people feel safe from internally and externally. And there are many virtues. So he begins with this symbol of Islam, which is to greet one another. So he says, in addressing how does a person give salam, he said, As-salam mubtada' yakun min al-mashi. It's important for us to note here that all conversations must start with salam. This is adab and this is character. Not with hello, or good morning, or hi, or more colloquial forms like what's up and that kind of stuff. How are you doing? The person must begin with salam. As-salam al-mubtada' yakun min al-mashi. And this is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His book, فَإِذَا دَخَلْتُمْ بُيُوتًا فَسَلِّمُوا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ. When you enter into your homes, then give salam upon yourselves. Now some of the ulama of tafsir have said yourself, meaning literally yourself. So when you're entering into the house and saying salam, you are supplicating for yourself in your own home, and then that extends to your family. فَسَلِّمُوا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ also refers to your family as well. So when you enter into your home, give salam to the people that are residing there with you. تَحِيَّةً مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ مُبَارَكَةً طَيِّبَةً. A greeting that has come to you from Allah. It is mubarak, it is blessed, and it is good. It is upright, it is clean, it is pure. كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ الْآيَاتِ. This is how Allah explains His ayat to you. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. This is how Allah explains His ayat to you so that you become of those people with reason and intellect and sense. Look how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala attaches and puts so many different characteristics of the salam in just this one ayah. You are supplicating for yourself, you are supplicating for other people. It is a symbol of Allah, it is a symbol of this religion, it has come from Allah, it is blessed, it is good, it is pure. It is from the ayat and the signs that Allah exists. And with that, you will attain reasoning and firmness and intellect and insight. The Prophet ﷺ also said, now this is an issue of dispute. Some of the ulama have said that this narration is weak. Shaykh al-Albani said that it is Hasan. What seems to be the case after doing some research, it looks like the hadith is weak, but a general principle with the way of the ulama is that weak hadith could be supported by something which is mutawatir. And the ayah is mutawatir, the ayah is sound. If you've got something which will support it, even despite it being weak, we can say that it is correct, at least in wording, at least in meaning, if not in wording. So it's been attributed that the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تبدأوا بالكلام قبل السلام. Do not begin your conversations before you give the salam. So if you meet someone, don't say good morning, how are you, what's going on, what are you up to today, how's things, how's family. No, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تبدأوا بالكلام. Do not start your conversation قبل السلام. Start with the salam. Then after the salam you can say whatever you want. Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, Hayak Allah, he said there's no harm in a person saying good morning, how are you, and as we will see, this is actually from the sunnah. However, the person must begin with salam. وَمَنْ بَدَأَكُمْ بِالْكَلَامِ قَبْلَ السَّلَامِ فَلَا تَجِيبُوهُ. In this narration, the Prophet ﷺ said, anybody who begins a conversation with the salam, do not respond to him. Do not respond to him. And this shows us the severity of starting without that dua, because it is a symbol of the Muslim. Some of the ulama who accepted this hadith will say that it's makruh to start or to respond to a person who doesn't begin with the salam, but as we will see, it is makruh to start and to respond, and that is what it seems to be the case. However, some of the ulama have said that it is haram to begin a conversation without the salam, as we will see inshallah. So the author says, السلام مبتدأ يكون من الماشي على القائد ومن الراكب على الماشي والجالس. What he is saying here is that a person who is moving, it is upon him to give the salam. Upon the person who is stationary. So if I'm sitting here and a person walks past, who gives the salam? From the sunnah we learn that the person who is walking, the person who is moving, is the one who gives the salam upon the person who is stationary. So if you go to someone's house, you are considered as the person who is moving, and the person in his home, he is considered as the person who is stationary. And this is from the adab. So if a person was to say, I'm not going to give this person salam, because I am, for whatever reason, I'm not going to give this person salam. He needs to then review, is the salam upon him, or is it upon the person, or is it upon the second person? And if he can understand this principle here, is that as long as he is moving, or he is the one that is seeking to draw that person's attention, then it is upon him to give the salam. And if he doesn't give the salam, that will be considered as bad etiquette and character from his part. وَالِابْتِدَاء بِهِ sunnah. Beginning with the salam is sunnah. And this is the opinion of the majority. And this is what I was saying before. If a person was to start a conversation without the salam, then he has fallen into something which is makruh. And responding to that person is also makruh. However, some of the ulama have said, وَالِابْتِدَاء بِهِ wajib. A person must start the conversation with salam. And a person must give the jawab and the response to that salam. But what seems to be the case is the view of the majority, which is that starting is with salam, is sunnah, and responding with it after the person has started with the sunnah becomes wajib. وإذا سلم الواحد من الجماعة مشاة أو الركاب أجزاء عن الجماعة. So now the author goes on talking about who should be the one that's giving the salam, and we can summarize by saying the person who is moving gives salam to the person who is stationary. The person who wants to address someone should be the one that gives the salam to those people who are not being addressed. The lesser group gives salam to the larger group. So if there's 2 people walking and there are 20 people sitting, the 2 people who are walking, they need to give salam, and it is upon them to give the salam. And if they were to walk by without giving the salam, this would not be correct etiquette. Also, what we learn from this statement here is that the younger gives salam to the elder. It is upon the younger to give the salam to the person who is elder. And this is important, because in our homes we often have visitors that come, family members that come, and the younger generation often, they do not go and give salam to the elders. They do not recognize their presence. They do not make a room for them in their sittings. They do not stand up for them. They do not go to them to shake their hands. Perhaps it might even be, as we see from the sunnah, and this is a tradition that is continued until today, when you see a scholar, you want to kiss him in his head, you kiss him in his hand, etc. This is the mannerism of Islam, the correct adab and character, which is that the younger one should recognize the presence of the elder, and he is the one, or she is the one, that gives salam to the one who is elder. And they make room for them. And if there is no one to sit, then they give up their own chair for them. They embrace them, they give them salam, etc. And this is from the correct etiquette and manners of greeting. And so far we have looked at greeting whilst a person is moving. The author then moves on to talking about what is the greeting and what should the person say. Before that he says, وَإِذَا رَدَّ وَاحِدٌ مِنَ الْمَجْلِسِ أو من الجلوس أجزى عن الجماعة. So if there are a smaller group and they are walking past a larger group, he is saying here that it becomes fard al-kifaya upon each group. And what that means is that from the two, as long as one of them says salam, then that is sufficient. And from the larger groups, it is 10 of them. As long as one of them responds, then that is sufficient. And this is important because the fact that if you are in groups, not everybody needs to give salam and not everybody needs to respond. So quite often in the masjid, one person enters into the masjid and there's already 10 people in the masjid. So say, for example, who is the one that should initiate the salam? Where is the... So now if he walks in and he doesn't give salam, it could be deemed as bad etiquette. I mean, alhamdulillah, in the customs that we live in here in the UK, you don't really have to give salam. If you don't, nobody will think of you as a bad person. However, in certain cultures, the culture is that everyone that comes into the masjid, 1 by 1, 2 by 2, whatever it is, they need to give the salam as they enter into the masjid. Therefore, who is it that gives the salam? Is the person that is walking. And the fact that he is the smaller group. Now, he gets into the masjid and he says salam, and there's probably 10 people, 5 people, 3 people in the masjid. Who is it that needs to respond? Is it all 3? As long as one person gives the salam or returns the salam, then this is sufficient. وَصِفَةُ السَّلَامِ, and the way of giving the salam, Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Or a person can say, as the Muhaqqiq is saying here, Salamun alaikum, meaning without the alif and the lam. You can say Salamun without the alif and the lam, Salamun, or you have to say Assalamu alaykum. Now, the Muhaqqiq has not mentioned, this is important because in the Salat, the majority of the ulama have said, if you say Salamun without the alif and the lam, then your salat is invalid. So when you're finishing the prayer and you say Salam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. If a person wants to do that, the salah is invalid. And that's the opinion of the majority of the ulama. What a person must say when it comes to the salah is Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And there are different ahkam connected to the taslim, which we don't have time for right now. However, the author is saying here, and this is again echoed by the Sheikh Abdul Salam As-Suhaimi, is that if a person says salam without the alif and the lam, that is sufficient. That is based on the dalil from the Quran. So when Ibrahim was visited by the Malaika, قالوا salam, they said salam. They didn't say as-salam. Therefore, when we are greeting one another, salam is fine, but in the salah it has to be as-salam. So he's saying here, the way to offer the salam is salamu alaykum, salamun alaykum or as-salamu alaykum. And the way that a person would respond is wa alaykum as-salam. And with what we have seen from these few sentences, we have different ahkam. And there are 4 points that I want to draw our attention to. Number 1, from correct etiquette and manner, when a person wants to speak to another person, is that they must be clear when they speak to them. And the person that is being addressed should be the person that responds. So if a person comes in and he doesn't say salam clearly, he says something like that, then that is not correct etiquette. And it is not wajib upon the person who has not clearly heard anything from that person to respond. Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah said in قال أصحابنا اشترط في ابتداء السلام وجوابه رفع الصوت بحيث يحصل al-isma'. He said isma' here. So now Imam al-Nawawi is saying our companions have said that from the conditions of the salam and responding to the salam and making it wajib upon that person is that he projects his voice so that the other person can clearly hear it. And we also know from the hadith of Jibreel, when Jibreel entered upon Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, from the hadith of Umar, the second hadith from Imam al-Nawawi's 40, well-known long hadith, Akhbirni al-Islam, Akhbirni al-Iman, that one, the very long one, tell me about Islam, tell me about Iman. When Jibreel walks in and he speaks to Muhammad, who is he speaking to? Jibreel knew the answers. This is why Umar radiallahu anhu said, we found it strange, he asked the question. And then he says, Sadaqt, you've spoken the truth. Therefore, Jibreel was asking those questions so that the other people can benefit. The Prophet ﷺ was the one being asked, what is Islam? Umar didn't know what Islam was. And the other people that were there, Abu Hurairah, we know Abu Hurairah was there, we know other companions were there because they've got their own versions of that incident. They knew the answer, but they didn't interrupt the conversation. The first benefit that we want to learn when we're referring to the greeting, but we're referring to character in general, is that when a person speaks, he must be clear. And he must address the person that he is speaking to in a clear voice. Therefore, the person who is not being addressed should not speak unless if he has permission to do so. And the person who is not clear doesn't need to be responded to. The second benefit that we can learn from what the author has said so far is that when a person speaks to you, then you speak to that person in the same way or in a better way. And this is specific to greetings, but it's general to all kinds of speech. Allah says in the Quran, وَإِذَا حُيِّيتُمْ بِتَحِيَّةٍ فَحَيُّوا بِأَحْسَنَ مِنْهَا أَوْ رُدُّوهَا. And Allah begins by saying here, بِأَحْسَنَ مِنْهَا, meaning if a person was to greet you, respond بِأَحْسَنَ مِنْهَا, respond in a better way. Allah gives precedence to that. أَوْ رُدُّوهَا, or in a similar way. So if a person says, Assalamu alaikum, you say, Wa alaikum salam. But what Allah is encouraging us to do in this ayah is by saying, Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. It's something better. Or wa barakatuh. It's up to you. Now this is the case when it comes to greetings, but this should be the case in all forms of speech. So if somebody says, Jazakallahu khaira, what do you say back to them? You can say, Jazakallahu khaira. Or when the Ansar said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they said, فَجَزَاكُمْ أَنَّ khayra, Allah reward you because of what you did for us, the best of jaza. So the Prophet ﷺ said, wa antum jazakumullah. So now you can respond in a better way, or in an equivalent way. If somebody says barakallah feek, you say barakallah feek, or wafikum barakallah, something like that. Or you can respond in a better way. And this is the case when it comes to all speech. So if somebody says, I really like the way that you made the rice today, it was very nice. Respond in a better way. No, but it's not as nice as yours. It's not as nice as the lasagna you made the other day. Something like that. In a better way. Or in an appropriate way. This is from the manners, this is the correct adab and character of the Muslim. So if a person praises you or says something to you which is nice, then you respond in the same way or better way. So they say, you made a nice dish, the rice was very nice. If you've got nothing better to say to them, then just say, Jazakallah khair. I'm sure you could do a good job. Something like that. In a nice way you respond. Or if there is something that you can return as a praise, as a benefit, then increase that. This is just praising, but this applies to all forms of speech. Respond in what is better, if you can, or at least in the same. That's the second benefit. The third benefit, so the first one is about clarity and addressing a person directly and not having people interrupt. The second one is about responding in what is the same way or better. Obviously responding in better is more encouraged. Third benefit, if a person wants to use something which is customary after the salam, then this is permissible. So the Prophet ﷺ was visited by his daughter Fatima, and they exchanged the salam, and then he said, Marhaban bi ibnati, marhaban, welcome. Umar radiallahu anhu used to say, Hayak Allah, Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum Hayak Allah. Therefore, whatever customary greeting that you may have, that is absolutely fine after the salam. The fourth benefit is that it is sunnah to ask how a person is. And this is from upright manners, and this is from the upright character of a Muslim. Because when you ask about other people, you show concern for their affairs, you show compassion towards them, you show them that you care, you show them that you are there to support them, and you are showing them respect. And if they are younger than you, that you are showing them mercy. So you meet a child, you ask him, how are you? What's he going to say to you? He's going to complain or talk about things that he is happy about, which will have no real concern to anyone. So he might complain about something which is completely insignificant. My crayon snapped. But the person who is asking about the affairs of the younger person is not about yourself anymore. It's about showing mercy and showing compassion and showing concern and showing support for that individual. And now, as we can learn from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, this applies to those who are elder than us, who have the same age as us, and those who are younger than us. Asking about how people are is from the most important aspects of greeting. Aisha radiallahu anha said that her old woman visited the Prophet ﷺ, and she said, I don't know who this old woman was. And she entered. And the Prophet ﷺ speaks to her. And Aisha doesn't know who this woman is, never seen her before. So the Prophet ﷺ recognized her and he got happy. And he said, Kayfa antum, kayfa halukum, kayfa kuntum ba'dana. And he's asking, how are you? How are your affairs? And she said, Bi khayr bi abi anta wa ummi ya Rasulullah. And she's responding to the Prophet ﷺ. After she left, the Prophet ﷺ was then asked by his wife Aisha, who is this lady that you're asking, how are you, etc. And he said, she is from the women that embraced Islam in Makkah but we haven't seen her for a very long time. She was left in Mecca. Now, for whatever reason, she's been able to come to Medina. Things have become easy, and she is from the Muslims of Mecca. So then he was saying here, how were you? كيف كنتم بعدنا? How were you after we left and we migrated, etc. These are some of the benefits. Now the next sentence was زيادة المأمور بها مستحب. The author is reiterating something that we've seen from the ayah where Allah says وَإِذَا حُيِّيتُم بِتَحِيَّةٍ فَحِيُّوا بِأَحْسَنَ مِنْهَا أَوْ رُدُّوهَا, then respond in a better way. The author is saying here, responding in a better way is mustahab. So you would add rahmatullahi or wa barakatuh. وَلَا يُسْتَحَبْ الزِّيَادَةَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ, and it is not recommended for a person to initiate more with wa rahmatullah. So he's saying from the etiquette is to start the salam with assalamu alaikum or assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and stop. ليترك للمجيب الزيادة المأمور بها وهي قوله وبركاته بأحسن منها أو رده. So that this gives a chance for the person who you are giving the salam to respond with something which is better. If you say to him from the beginning, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, is he able to respond with something which is better? He can't, because there is nothing better. Now, there is a narration which says, وَمَغْفِرَتُهُ, but many of the ulama have said that narration is weak. And Shaykh al-Albani said it is Hasan, but many of the ulama have said it is weak, and Allah knows best. It seems as if the narration is weak. So a person will say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and the person responding can say wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, or add it with wa barakatuh, so that you do what is being commanded in this ayah, which is of responding in what is similar or better. Now, some of the ulama have taken objection to what has been said here. And this is based on the principle that if a person wants to do a good deed, you look at yourself first. Attaining rewards and good deeds, a person should have a sense of jealousy over that. So if we were to say that, you know what, I'm not going to say wa barakatuhu so that the other person can get more rewards, that kind of, with some of the ulama, have said, no, that's not correct. You start with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And we have narrations from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam doing that. He stood in the khutbah, he found a man saying salam, he said 10 rewards, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi, 20 rewards, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This man gets 30 rewards. So this in itself is dalil to say that the person should initiate with the better. And this doesn't mean that the person who is responding gets less of the reward. No, it gives him an opportunity to respond and get 30 himself as well. Therefore, what the author has said here has been disputed by some of the ulama. What we learn from this is that if a person hears the salam, he must respond. Like we said before, if it is not clear and he hasn't heard it properly, he doesn't need to respond. What we also learn from this is something that affects us all when it comes to our interactions on social media, etc., is that if a person gives salam verbally, then all of the ulama are agreed that they must respond verbally. Somebody gives you salam verbally, you must respond verbally. You can't respond in your head, you can't write down, unless if there is a need for you to write down, but you need to respond verbally, according to the ayah that we have quoted also. However, if a person writes to you and gives salam, how would you then respond? There are two ways of responding. either you respond with the salam and then your message. So, Assalamu alaikum, how are you? Are you coming to my house today? Wa alaikum salam, I am fine, how are you? Yes, I am. Because writing responds with writing. Or the second option is that if a person intends not to respond, or he wants to respond but respond in a very quick way, then he can respond to the salam verbally and give that person the message. Assalamu alaikum, are you coming to my house today? Yes, I am. That's the responding. Okay. So now a person who sent the message initially will think, well, why didn't he give salam to why didn't he respond to my salam? That is because with a large number of the ulama, written tahiyyah of salam, the written greeting of salam, the person who receives the written form has the option of responding by wording or responding verbally. So now imagine you don't want to respond. Imagine somebody sends you a broadcast message, Assalamu alaikum, today there's going to be a janazah at this time, etc. May Allah give us a good end. Does he need to respond to that message by saying wa alaikum salam? The answer is no. For two reasons. Number one, as we will see later, the tahiyyah of salam was not specific to him. It's a broadcast to everyone, and you can clearly tell by the nature of the message that it wasn't specific to him. The person who sent out the message sent out to everyone, so he doesn't anticipate wa alaikum salam from every single person. And for argument's sake, and if a person wants to say, well, I feel like responding to the salam to be safer, and for argument's sake, perhaps he did send it to me, I'm not sure if it was a broadcast, I think he has sent it to me, then you do not need to respond to that person with just the line, wa alaikum salam. You can do it verbally. So depending on the situation, if a person is responding or not responding to a written salam, you can do it verbally or non-verbal. The author then says, وَإِذَا سَلَّمَ ثُمَّ حَالَ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ مَنْ سَلَّمَ عَلَيْهِ شَجَرَةٌ أَوْ جِدَارٌ ثُمَّ انْتَقَى عَادَتْ سُنَّةُ السَّلَامِ كذلك كان أصحاب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ورضي عنهم. Here the author is saying, if there is a cut in your conversation, so for example, if you are walking and a wall gets in between you, or a tree gets in between you, and then you meet up again, or a car gets in between you, so you've crossed the road and the person crossed the road after you, something like that. There's been a cut in the fact that you've been talking to this person or walking with this person, and it becomes recommended for that person to repeat the salam once again. Not wajib, but recommended from good character, meaning it is permissible to stand. What we learn from all of this also is permissible to stand to greet the person. This doesn't fall under the prohibition of standing, because here, if you are walking with the person, you are standing. What is haram, the Prophet ﷺ forbade for us to stand up to greet one another. What is haram is that we stand up out of instilling pride from that person. So either he commands us to stand, or he likes it that we stand for him out of pride and arrogance. However, if you are standing and that person is standing, then you can give salam, there's no harm in that. Or you are sitting and the person is standing. From the narration that we saw from Fatima, when Fatima used to enter into the Prophet's house, often he used to be sitting. And when he used to hear his daughter say Salamu alaikum, he used to say Wa alaikum salam, and he used to get up on his feet and he used to go to the door and he used to grab her, he used to kiss her on her forehead, and he used to say Marhaba bi ibnati, come. He used to grab her and sit down next to me. So the Prophet used to get up for his daughter. Is it that his daughter commanded him to get? No. Is it that it's going to instill arrogance and pride? And no. Therefore, it is permissible for a person to stand up. The reason why standing up is because of the show and the instilling of arrogance, which is not allowed. The author then says, therefore, from correct manner and character is to show that respect towards a person And if the conversation has been cut off, then it becomes recommended to renew your dua towards that person. However, if it is going to harm the person, then don't do that. You think, how is the salam going to harm a person? It could be because, say for example, they're trying to speak to you about something and it's important. This is important as well. It's not been mentioned here. It's been mentioned in the Adab al-Sharif ibn Muflih. And he's got times when a person doesn't give salam. And one of them is that when a person is trying to explain something to you which is very important, don't cut that person off by giving salam. Because now what you're going to do is going to make it wajib upon him to stop what he is saying and give the salam and then return, and then that might affect the delivery of the thing that he was saying. So Ibn Mufli gives examples. He said that if a person is in a dars and the shaykh is explaining and the dars is full, don't come into the majlis and give salam so that it interrupts the shaykh, because he's trying to explain something which is important. So a person must bear in mind and take precaution and analyze the situation when he wants to issue the greeting of salam. And just general character and etiquette is that you don't want to cause harm upon people when you want to speak to them. وَيُكْرَحْ السَّلَامُ عَلَى الشَّوَابِ النِّسَاءِ فَإِذَا ذَلِكَ يَجْلُبْ جَوَابَهُنَّ. He's saying here that it is makruh to give salam to young women. We're talking about women who are of the age of adulthood, and who are not married, because this will create a necessity for them to then respond, and their voices وَعَسَاهُ يَجْلُبْ الْفِتْنَةِ, and it could be that their voice or the fact that a woman is speaking to a man could create fitna in a man, and it can do for some men. They don't really have any interaction with women, so if he was to say salam or speak to a woman, sometimes it could be a fitna. Had he not given salam to her, it wouldn't have been a fitna. He wouldn't even have thought of her or something like that. But now the fact that she is speaking to him can become a fitna. وَكَمْ مِنْ صَوْتٍ جَرَّ هَوَاء وَعِشْقًا. The author then says, how many voices and how many sounds and how many utterances and how many responses and delivery and just general voices, salt, creates hawa and desires and love and adoration towards that thing. And there's an example in the Sunnah. There was a man, he was buying from a woman. He was trading with a woman. And they began to speak, and the conversation increased, until he ended up kissing her. Could you imagine that? It started off with something which was permissible, but as the author is saying here, that permissibility will turn into something which is makruh or even haram if there is going to be a consequence which is negative as a result. So a man can speak to a woman if it is within those guidelines and boundaries in the Sharia, especially if there is a need like trade and teaching and answering questions and assisting, etc. But if that is outside of the bounds of the Sharia, then it could create fitna. And this is what the author is saying. So this man starts off speaking, one companions. He starts speaking to this woman and they're trading with one another. Permissible. But it created, as the author is saying here, وَكَمْ مِنْ صَوْتٍ جَرَّ هَوَاء وَعِشْقٍ. How many voices sometimes create a desire and an ishq and admiration towards that sound. And he's saying salt, sound, could be music, could be any kind of salt, any kind of sound. So this man then ended up kissing this woman. The man realized that he's done something bad, and he actually thought that he'd done a major sin. So he went to Masjid al-Nabawi and he prayed Salat al-Asr with the Prophet. After Salat al-Asr, he goes to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he says, to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, فَقَدْ آتَيْتُ حَدٍّ مِّنْ حُدُودِ اللَّهِ. I have come to the boundaries of one of the boundaries of Allah. فَقِمْ عَلَيَّ حَدًّا. So then please apply the capital punishment of zina upon me. So Prophet said, have you done zina? Seriously, have you done zina? And he said, yes. This woman, she started speaking to me and I ended up kissing her. And some of the narrations say that woman, she wasn't one of the pious, practicing women. She was a bit questionable in her status and mindset as well. So the Prophet ﷺ asks and he says, what have you done? The man said, I ended up kissing this woman. So the Prophet ﷺ said, did you just pray with us right now? So the man said, yeah. So the Prophet ﷺ recited to him the ayah from Surah Hud. He said, no, this is not the major sin that requires the capital punishment. This is not zina. أقم الصلاة طرف النهار وزلف من الليل إن الحسنات يذهبن السيئات ذلك ذكرى للذاكرين. Establish the salah in the two ends of the day and for a portion of the night, meaning the 5 daily prayers. And if you do this, your minor sins will be expiated. And this is a reminder for those who want to be reminded. The point here is as the author is saying, there should be boundaries between male gender and female gender interactions, but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be any. But he is saying here that from character is that they need to reflect and have foresight as to what's going to happen to their own iman and what it could then create as a fitna, perhaps even for her maybe. Now the majority of the ulama have said that it is makruh for a man to initiate the salam to a woman or a woman to initiate the salam to a man. And some of the ulama, this is the opinion of the Hanafi madhab, is that if it does happen, what do you do now? So the Hanafis, and this is a very strong opinion if you think about it, they have said now the man has to combine two obligations. Number one, so say the woman gave the man salam, he has to combine two obligations. Number one, he has to respond to the salam. It's wajib upon him. Haqqul Muslim and Muslim sit. The Prophet said the right of a Muslim upon another Muslim are 6, and from them he said Raddus salam, to respond to the salam. This is haqq wajib. So that's wajib, but it's also wajib for him to preserve himself. قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ. Tell them to lower their gaze and protect their private parts. So don't put yourselves in fitna. So the Hanafis have said, respond to that woman, or the woman can respond to the man, but do it in a quiet voice. Do it in a quiet voice. Whatever the case, the person can implement whatever view they think is strong. For me, I think that is a stronger view from the Hanafi madhab. The others have said you can respond verbally, so if she does it audibly, you can respond audibly, but this is makruh. So what we learn from this chapter here is that it is from correct character and manners that a Muslim man and a Muslim female preserve their chastity. And also from the character of a Muslim is that you respect the right of others. Now this is important. Why do we have such strict rule when it comes to gender segregation? Is it because men think that they are better than women? Is it that they think that they can't trust themselves around women? Is it because of whatever other reason that people may, understand from Islam? The reason why is, number one, to preserve your own chastity. And number two, to respect the rights of others. So if this sister doesn't want to be spoken to, then respect that. If the sister's family do not like it, then respect that. How would you like it if people kept speaking to your mother, your sister, your daughter, your nieces, etc., your aunties? Therefore, Islam is a religion of preserving modesty and chastity, and it's also a religion of respecting the family rights, the individual rights, the communal and social rights of one another. And not that you transgress another person's rights based on what you want and your own desires. That doesn't mean that there is no gender interaction in Islam. It just means that preserving chastity and respect takes precedence over all things. And if a person can preserve that, how many times did the Prophet ﷺ interact with female companions? The Prophet ﷺ used to go to Ayman's house and he used to sit with her and he used to ask her how she was, etc. After they passed away, Abu Bakr and Umar used to go. And they said, let's carry on this sunnah of the Messenger ﷺ. So they're not mahram to Ayman, but there was two of them. They were not going against the boundaries and the guidelines of the Sharia, but it was men and female interaction. And this is permissible, inshallah, as long as, like we have said here, that we can preserve your chastity and respect so that there's no fitna that comes about. And this is why the author says, if it is salam, وَلَا بَأْسَ بِالسَّلَامِ عَلَى الْجَائِزِ وَالْبَارِزَاتِ لِعَدْمِ الْفِتْنَةِ بِأَصْوَاتِهِنْ. If it is an elderly woman or a young girl, then there is no harm in a person interacting with them, giving salam to them, because there's no fitna involved. But here it's important because this is the illah, this is the reason that the hukm has been placed, as the ulama have said, يدور الحكم مع علته وجودا وعدما. يدور الحكم مع علته وجودا وعدما. That the hukm of a thing depends on the reason of that hukm. And if the reason is missing, then the hukm changes accordingly. So let's say, for example, this is an important principle in Sharia. Let's say, for example, alcohol. We have alcohol. Alcohol is haram. What's the reason? Because it intoxicates. Good. Can we now use that for products, etc.? According to the majority of ulama, it is najis. Let's just go with that opinion for now. That it's impure. Okay. Now, if we get that alcohol and we take the intoxication properties out of it, does it become permissible to use? The answer is yes. Because the reason for it being haram has been removed. يدور الحكم مع علته وجودا وعدما. That the hukm of something depends on the reason of that hukm. And if it is there, then it is there. And if it is not there, then the hukm is not there. And this is what the author is saying here. If there is no fitna, then you can give the salam to the elderly women and to young children. But if there is a fear of hikmah, if there is a fear of fitna, then you are not allowed. And now he says something which is important, a separate point which we can derive from this when it comes to akhlaq, really important, which is, why do we give salam to our young daughters? لأن البرزة تحتاج إلى السلام عليها. This is because young children need the salam, مرد سلامها, and they need to be taught how to give the salam. وللحاجة تأثير بذلك. And that there is a need for them to learn this and have a positive influence. So now the author is saying here three things when it comes to giving salam to young children. Number one, we should give salam to young children. Why? Because they need the dua. Assalamu alaikum. They need the dua. They need the salam of Allah on them. Number one. Number two, they need to be shown kindness. And number three, they need to have that positive influence in their lives. I'm going to skip the Arabic now because of the fact that it's going to be Maghrib time, and we're going to get into Maghrib time through this explanation, as there is no salah in the masjid being established right now, and hopefully we're trying to complete the session of greetings, because we've only got 6 or so sessions on this book. So we need to meet certain milestones every week. The author then says that it's permissible to look at women in order to communicate with them, such as a woman being a witness or buying something from her and trading, etc. Therefore, what we learn is that it is not incorrect Islamic etiquette and character for a man to interact with a female or the other way around, as long as it is within guidelines and boundaries, and that there is no harm involved and there is no haram involved, etc. The author then says, may Allah have mercy on him, that there is no harm in giving salam to children in general and teaching them this adab, and this will actually help them to understand what correct manners and etiquettes are, وَتَدْرِيبًا عَلَى حُسْنِ الْمَعَاشِرِ, and it also teaches them how to live honorably with one another. And this is important, that we need to teach one another how to live, to the extent that some of the ulama have even said that you need to train your children. So this is not something I condone, not wholeheartedly, but it is a good exercise, and make the child aware that this is part of an exercise, which is you put them in a situation. What would you do if someone said this? What would you do? See what they say and respond, and try and help them nurture a good response. Not that you tease them so that you say, oh yeah, well I was just testing him anyway. No, I'm not saying that. But if you are going to do something, that you make it clear, and you only do it according to their level of understanding and ability. So some of the ulama have actually even said that a person is good manner, وَتَدْرِيبًا عَلَى حُسْنِ الْمَعَاشِرِ. That's not what the author is saying here. The author is actually saying the opposite, that you teach them how to be well and good and have good manners and etiquette, etc. But what I'm saying here is that some of the ulama have even said that you can test them with the negative aspects. So now you put him in a bad situation, say, what would you do in that situation? Are you going to get angry? Are you going to hit the person? Are you going to get physical, etc.? So the author is saying here that children need the ta'aleem, they need to be taught what correct etiquettes are. Then he moves on to talk about the etiquettes of salam when entering into your home. That it is recommended that when you leave the gathering, you give salam, just like it is recommended for a person to give the salam when he enters. However, he says, وَالدُّخُولُ أَشَدُّ إِسْتِحْبَابًا, that when a person starts the conversation, or when the person enters the home, it is more emphasized, the emphasis is far greater in starting with the salam. So when you enter into the home, it is very, very important that you start with salam. But as you leave the home, you should also leave with salam. But he is saying here, may Allah have mercy on him, that a person must start with the salam as he enters a conversation or enters into his home. Now what we learn from this is that there are three scenarios of entering into a home. If it is your own home, you enter while giving the salam, and that is what the author is saying here. If you are trying to enter into a place which is not your own home, then there are three things that you must do. Number one, or four things that you must do. Number one, you start with the salam. Number two, you make yourself known. Number three, you ask for permission. And number four, you wait patiently. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تدخل بيوتا غير بيوتكم حتى تستأنسوا وتسلموا على أهلها ذلكم خير لكم لعلكم تذكرون. Allah says in ayah number 27, Surah Nur, which you can refer back to. Allah is saying, do not enter into your home or the homes of other people until you get the permission, and you've been granted the permission, and you give salam. And we also learn from the sunnah is to make yourself known. And this is important because if a person is trying to communicate with someone and perhaps they don't have your phone number and you're sending them a text message, etc., this is what you start off with. Assalamu alaikum, this is such and such person from this place. do you mind if I can speak to you right now, or something like that. Also from the adab is the adab of waiting. And Islam shows emphasis on waiting and being granted permission. And this, as we learn from the ayah that we have just quoted, is azka lakum, is better and more purer for you. Why? Because when you wait, you are protecting your honor, and you are protecting the honor of the person that you are wishing to speak to. And you are protecting their right to make a decision to speak to you right now or maybe later. So when your phone rings, don't get upset if the person doesn't respond. If he messages you, don't get upset if they don't respond. From the correct adab is that a person has to have correct character when it comes to waiting. Allah says in the Quran, we mentioned this ayah a moment ago, قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ, tell the believers to lower their gazes. وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ, and to protect their private parts. Anything which is going to lead to fitna, you're not allowed to do that. And this is the tafsir of Imam al-Sa'di of this ayah. Allah tells us to lower our gaze. Allah tells us to protect our private parts, meaning lower your gaze and do not expose yourself to fitna. ذَلِكَ أَزْكَى لَهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا يَصْنَعُونَ, ayah number 30 from Surah An-Nur. وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ, the same instructions to the female believers. Ibn Kathir, in his tafsir, he quotes a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, which I believe is in Sunan Tirmidhi, where he said, أَطْرَقْ بَصَرُكَ, يعني أنظر إلى الأرض, meaning when Allah says lower your gaze to the believers, meaning look at the ground. So from this we learn that the adab and the character of the believer whilst he is waiting is to wait patiently. Don't look right and don't look left. So if you're waiting at the cashier, it is not correct adab for the person to look right and to look left, look at that person, what's that person buying, what's this person. Wait patiently. Lower your gaze. Don't do anything which is going to be a fitna for you. Preserve other people's rights. When you're trying to enter into a person's home, wait on the side so they can't, so you're not looking directly in. And from what has been mentioned by the contemporary ulama, when it comes to technological communications, use an appropriate time on when speaking to someone, use an appropriate length, and speak after permission only as much what is needed. The author then says, and this is now manners and character in us showing compassion and love towards one another. He said that it is recommended for us to shake hands from a man to a man or a woman to a woman. And we know from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that there are two believers who meet and then they split. Yeah, no, it's just 10 minutes inshallah. إِلَّا غَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَهُمَا قَبْلَ أَن يَتَفَرَّقَا, except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will expiate for them their sins after they have shaken hands and they have departed. Therefore the author is saying here is recommended in instilling love and character. So now these are principles. Let's bear this in mind. And when a person meets someone, it's not just, okay, well, I want to meet him, give him salam. No, it's a character building aspect of Islam. That if you have to meet your brother and shake his hand and show salam to him from your heart and verbally, etc., then everything surrounding the messages that we learn from these aspects of the Sharia should be also part of our lives. So Anas bin Malik radiallahu anh, he used to put perfume on his hand before he used to meet the brother. Why? Because this is part of love and completion of Iman towards your brother. In essence, what we are saying here, part of character is to say and to do for your brother which is going to help him, which is going to remove harm from him. And even if he doesn't anticipate you doing that thing for him, you do that thing. See where he needs help and do it for him. If he's got a bag, pick it up. If he needs for the door to be open, open the door for him. Because these are the messages that we are learning from this chapter here. Also what we learn here, and this is very important, that the author is saying that it is recommended for the Muslims to shake hands with one another. The Prophet ﷺ said, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ تَشَبَّهُ بِغَيْرِنَا. They are not from us, that those who resemble those people who have a different identity. And he gave an example. Do not resemble the Yahud or the Nasara. The Yahud, they greet one another with fingers. Don't we do that now? If they're in social media, do something like this or like this, I don't know. Like this. The Yahud greet one another with fingers. And the Nasara greet one another bil-kaf. They signal one another. You're driving past. All of that is not permissible. The Prophet ﷺ said, do not respond in this manner. Rather, respond and initiate with salam or with the handshake. But now a person will say, well, I'm driving past and I see my brother, what do I do? You are allowed now to put up your hand, but then verbalize the salam. And this, I've done this with many of the ulama. I've seen them do that themselves. They're walking past, salam alaikum. You can't hear them, you're driving. But they will verbalize in order for them not to fall into this prohibition here. But we also learn that it is not permissible for male to interact with female in that regard. There is a lot of research as well gone into the fact that touching a male touching a female touching a male has an impact, and it creates a need for intimacy from the woman or from the man. And there is actual research in that. Because of time, we don't have the ability to go through that in detail. The author then finishes by saying, and there is no harm in a person hugging or kissing the hand or the forehead of the people of religion, the people who are elder, and it is recommended for a person to stand up for an imam or their parents or the person of ilm or the person of piety in order to show them respect. But it is not permissible for a person to do that if a person is going to instill arrogance, etc. in that. There is more that needs to be said, but because of Salat al-Maghrib, etc., and our time running out, I think we'll leave it at that. These are some of the things that we learn about the salam and the rulings connected to salam. All in all, my brothers and sisters, what this religion is teaching us is that a Muslim is somebody who is a person upon firm identity and character, and that is something which is internal and external, and the Muslim wants to spread salam in his self, in his speech and in his actions, and with that he instills goodness to other people and he removes harm from them. And inshallah next week we're going to be looking at brotherhood, some of the adab concerning gatherings, and some of the adab concerning our appearances. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq and success. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله على نبينا محمد.